Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Muskat, and I'm honored to serve as chair of UJA Women's Philanthropy for the 2020 annual campaign, alongside my wonderful vice chair, Perry Kirschenblatt. On behalf of myself, Perry, our Jewish Foundation chair, Keith Ray, and vice chair, Leonard Abramsky, who is also one of our current annual campaign chairs, we would like to welcome you to the third financial literacy webinar in our series. We hope you enjoy tonight's discussion. Before we begin our program, I would like to extend our appreciation to this evening's sponsors: Airden Burles LLP, BMO Financial Group, Crow Soberman LLP, Fogler Rubinoff LLP, and Lipton LLP. We are so very grateful for your continuous support. Thank you so much. I think it's fair to say that 2020 was a challenging year. While there's no need to recap all the struggles we went through as a global community, I do feel it's important to highlight the amazing resilience of our local Jewish community. I would like to acknowledge and thank everyone who invested in UJA's work, whether as a volunteer, donor, or fund holder. Your time and money were both instrumental in enabling us to support our community at a time of immense need. I would also like to highlight 3 milestones we achieved together as a community. First, our incredible community's Our incredible community quickly mobilized volunteers to help those in need. Literally, thousands of people pitched in and donated their time to make wellness calls, pack groceries, and deliver meals. And those are just a few examples of the selflessness that runs deep throughout our community. The second major milestone of 2020 came from the foundation, one of our community's best kept secrets. The foundation established the Community Resilience Loan Fund, created to support the recovery and renewal of Jewish programming that suffered severe financial fallout. Thanks to the foundation, over 2,000 kids will be able to return to their favorite nonprofit Jewish summer camps, hopefully this summer, fingers crossed. And third, UJA's annual campaign had a record-setting year. At a time of such great uncertainty, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto launched the Emergency Campaign for Community Resilience. And we are now on the cusp of raising $85 million, the amount we set as our goal to cover the emergency needs of our community. Incredibly, this is a 40% increase above our regular annual campaign, an astonishing achievement and a necessary one given how much the needs have grown. As chair of Women's Philanthropy, I would be remiss if I did not mention that women's gifts to the campaign this year represent almost $16 million. These are just 3 examples that reflect the very best of our community in a very difficult year. And I'm so hopeful that this hard work will be a springboard for a much brighter 2021. As I mentioned earlier, the foundation is one of our community's best kept secrets. Many do not realize that the foundation is one of the largest community foundations in Canada, with over 2,200 funds and planned gifts comprising over $660 million in assets and expectancies. The foundation allows individuals and families to turn their charitable vision into impactful solutions for some of our community's most pressing challenges. Over and above UJA's annual campaign, a fund with the foundation can help connect you to the organizations and projects that you're passionate about. As well, if you're a Lion of Judah, you can endow a yearly gift to UJA's annual campaign in order to further strengthen the Jewish community now and well into the future. If you'd like more information on endowments, opening a donor-advised fund, leaving a legacy with the foundation, or you simply want to start thinking about your philanthropic journey, please reach out to Brett Henry at the foundation. Now, you can also reach out to the co-chairs of this evening's webinar, who are both long-standing active members of the Foundation's Professional Advisory Committee. I'm also excited to say that I am now a new trustee with the Foundation, so I look forward to being a much more active member in our community. Now, speaking of our co-chairs, I'm pleased to introduce them to you, and they are not only our co-chairs, they are our moderators, Alexandra Spinner and Marni Pernica. Ali is a partner of tax at Crowe Soberman LLP and is on the Foundation Board of Trustees. Marni is a partner at Aird and Burles LLP. Both are very active and dedicated leaders within the foundation. So without further ado, it's over to you, Ali and Marni.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Melissa. We are so glad to be involved with both the foundation and women's philanthropy, and we are very excited for tonight's program. If you have any questions for our speakers during the program, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time. Marni and I will be looking through the questions and we'll do our best to make sure that they're answered.
I am so pleased to introduce our speakers for this evening and thank them for joining us. So Laura Cukier is a senior manager at Lipton LLP. Karen Rosen is a partner in the Financial Services and Insolvency Group. I'm pretty sure she's the leader there at Fogler Rubinoff. And Melanie Siegel is a senior vice president and portfolio manager at BMO Nesbitt Burns. All three of these impressive women have incredible shared experience in the financial services industry, and we're grateful for their time tonight to share their knowledge. Welcome, ladies, and thanks for joining us. And with that, I think it's time to start.
Excellent. So, Marni, I'm going to ask the first question, and I'm going to ask the first question to Laura. So, Laura, one thing that's important is that clients of ours will come to us and say, "Hey, Laura, I have a new business plan that I've just put together, and I know that I'm going to need money to help make my business run, and I'm going to need financing from the bank." What do we tell our clients to do to prepare when they know that they're going to need that financing from the bank?
Sure, Ali, great question. So with clients that are looking to go to the bank for financing, some of the preparation work I would encourage them to do before going would be really to consider a financial plan. Put together a projection that should include a cash flow projection as well over the next couple of years. And I think that's really important because it really will show them what they actually are looking for from the bank in terms of financing. What do they need in order to support their business over the next couple of years? And one of the other things to really include within that projection is any costs that might be required to produce either reviewed or audited financial statements, which are sometimes things that the bank is going to require the business to produce in order to obtain that financing on an annual basis. The bank also may require personal guarantees in order to provide that financing. So you might want to be prepared for that as well before going to the bank.
That's great, Laura. And one of the things that I find also is that something that people should be prepared for as well is that the preparation and requirement of the review or audit, those financial statements, they can sometimes be expensive. It's not the cheapest thing in the world, and it's something to prepare for and budget in that cash flow plan. But if the bank or the lender requires it, then it's something that they're going to have to keep in mind. So one follow-up, accountant to accountant, a follow-up accounting question here. In light of the recent pandemic, I'm hearing lots of chatter in my office around something called, we're hearing about certain clients that may be facing financial hardship as a result of their businesses being impacted by COVID-19. And I'm hearing a lot of talk amongst the accountants in our group talking about something called, including a going concern note in the financial statement. So what does this mean? Why should businesses care? And why is everyone getting so excited about this concept?
Sure, great follow-up. So going concern is a concept that's really standard within financial statement frameworks. And what it really means is the business is going to continue operating without really considering any kind of liquidation of assets in order to meet its requirements. Now, a going concern note within the financial statements really just highlights the uncertainty that the business is going through. And as you had mentioned, the pandemic is creating significant uncertainty. And that uncertainty can come in many different forms, whether it's uncertainty with supply chain, potential issues in repaying debt, repaying creditors, the inability this year or going forward for the shareholders to support the business. So those are all the things really to consider in terms of uncertainty. And it's important to note that financial statements highlight this to the users of the financial statements in particular. And while the uncertainty due to the pandemic, it is bringing up these conversations with clients, it's important to note that going concern and the uncertainty can come up in some other situations as well. It doesn't always mean a doom and gloom perspective. It can come up when, you know, there's a customer that's lost, that there's uncertainty as to whether or not you may replace that customer. Mm-hmm. And going concern note can occur in a startup where, you know, the customer base and the product are uncertain to really take off in the market. So it's really all focused around this uncertainty, and definitely thinking about how the pandemic is going to impact the business in, you know, the short and long term is really important for the users of the financial statements to consider.
Mm-hmm. So for any of our webinar guests who are watching today, if you have businesses, perhaps there may be some comfort in the fact that there are many people or many businesses who are facing the same pressures and considerations as you. And I like that you mentioned that just because there perhaps has to be a going concern note in a statement doesn't necessarily mean that it's all doom and gloom, but of course the users of that statement need to know that information. Thank you so much. Marni, I'll flip it to you.
I had one quick follow-up just question from someone who's trying to start a business, and you know, the question was posed on the premise that the business plan has already been created, but just who typically would help someone who kind of has the concept in their head of a business, kind of push them through the cash flow projections and, you know, making the business plan itself? Like, where does that advice kind of start? Just out of curiosity. Does anyone know?
Laura, as the accountant, you want to take that?
I mean, you can have that discussion with your financial advisory team, whether that comes in the form of an accountant or financial planner as well. I think those discussions are important to also have and gain many different perspectives in terms of what you should be considering at the ground level.
Okay, great. Okay, Mel, I'm going to throw this one to you. So my business is profitable and produces positive cash flow. Historically, I've reinvested the profits back into the business to grow the business and have shied away from taking on debt. As a result, I do not have a significant pool of investments outside of my business. My banker told me that the bank's willing to let my business borrow money, which will allow me to take some personal cash out of the business to invest in the market. How do I evaluate this option?
Okay, look, it's
lots in there.
There's lots in there, yeah. Thanks for the question. Look, it's an interesting opportunity because you could diversify away from the business. You know, we're uncertain what type of business this person's in, but it's a way to diversify. If they borrow a certain percentage, I'm not big on debt. It's just sort of just not my way, but you could certainly, it's a write-off, and you know, it's a way to diversify and get away from the existing business, especially if there's positive cash flow. And you have to consider the returns that you're earning within the business versus the returns that you're going to earn into let's say an investment portfolio or a real estate investment portfolio. It depends what it may be. Interest rates are really low right now, so that's kind of interesting. So the rate of return doesn't have to be that great. Inflation's starting to pick up, but still the net return, you know, if you're getting, you could probably look for it's sort of, again, it depends on what the company's doing and the cash flow of the company. Now, the other thing you might want to consider is too, you're diversifying away from your company so that if God forbid you're in a very cyclical business, and you know, given what's gone on with COVID, some businesses have really been affected quite poorly and others have exponentially grown. So it depends on the industry that your company's in. You might want to start taking some money out of the business and diversifying into other parts, you know, either into investments or real estate investments.
You're on mute.
There you go. You know, one thing I was going to add to that I hear in my practice from my clients, and by all means, Karen or Laura, if you have any thoughts as well. What I often hear is that clients say, you know, why should I put all of my equity or my assets at risk? If the bank is willing to lend me some money for use in my operating active business, great. Let them be partners with me in the business, and let the bank put some of their money at risk as well. Of course, subject to being, you know, not that I'm advocating for, you know, borrowing to the hilt and being, you know, at risk of concern of not meeting bank covenants and items like that. But one might say, sure, if the bank's willing to let you to put in some money and allow the owner to extract some funds and use that money for other purposes, including diversified investments, it might be the way to go. Okay, excellent. So Karen, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask a question to you that I also often see quite often. This is when a new client will come to me, or a friend might come to me and say, "Hey, Ali, I have an amazing business opportunity, a new plan, and I'm going to go into business with my best friend, my brother, my sister, my cousin." And they say, "You know what? Nothing's ever going to go wrong. We're going to be besties for the rest of our lives. But my other, you know, my spouse or my brother or someone keeps talking about a shareholders agreement. And I know that that's really, really expensive. It may not be, but, you know, or some sort of formality to the agreement. Why is that necessary? Why do we always recommend to people that when they're entering into business relationships with others, that they solidify or formalize their agreements?
I think that, well, first of all, that's a great question. You know, when you're starting a business, just like when you're starting a marriage, there are priorities. You know, where you're going to spend your money, on your first down payment for your house. And you have to, on life insurance, on how you have to have home insurance and car insurance and all those things. And when you start a business, I think you sort of have to look at it in the same light. There are certain costs of doing business, and they save you a lot of money down the line. And one of the things that I've seen in my practice and that many of my partners deal with on a regular basis in the litigation department is when things don't work out. You still love each other, perhaps. You still are best friends really deep inside, but you don't see eye to eye on the business. One person's lost interest. If you're, you know, one person has started something else or left the city. You know, there's so many things that can happen over the course of a lifetime in a company, in a new startup, in whatever. And I think you just have to be thoughtful and not approach it like you do a regular friendship, but approach it in a business-like fashion. Because when you do go to your bank, when you do go to look for other investors, let's say you want to expand and grow, you want them to see you as having had the forethought to put a plan in place to deal with all sorts of contingencies. But one of the things that often happens when partners fall out of favor with one another is that they're left without a plan on how to exit. And that's when you end up having to go to litigation. And if you have an agreement, you can oftentimes you know, find different avenues to make it easier. It doesn't mean to say that it's going to not be somewhat ugly if you have a fight or a falling out, but it does help you put things in perspective, and at least you've thought about it. At least you don't have to rely on just the corporate statute to help you, settle your dispute. Here you have a plan. You know how you're going to deal with, whether it be a falling out or a death, God forbid, or disability or a terrible illness. You have the plans in place, and it can deal with all sorts of things. It can deal with how you raise money. It can deal with how you ask each other for money to capitalize the business. It can deal with how you deal with life insurance proceeds, what happens to your spouses, what happens to your interest in the business should something happen to you and your children. So I think it's just about making the choice to spend a few dollars up front to ensure that you're not spending a whole lot more down the line.
Well, and something that I was just going to mentioned, it's often from an estate planning perspective. It's one of the first things we ask when clients come to us and say, I have a business, I'm a shareholder, even if they're, and this sounds funny, but even when they're the sole shareholder and we're talking about passing it down to the next generation and the concept of like them entering into a unanimous shareholders agreement. It's all about kind of crossing your T's and dotting your I's when things are good so that, even if it's not a falling out, but it's a death, do you really want to be in business with, your partner's husband or your brother's wife, right? So, and, looking at the objectives. So shareholders agreements are something that we look at all the time and generally recommend, and clients laugh when they're like, I'm the only shareholder, why do I need a shareholders agreement? But when you're looking at it from the estate planning perspective, it's because, well, if you plan to pass this down and to have your kids hold shares together, there needs to be an understanding about what's going to happen and how that's going to go. So that's one of the things that we look at all the time and always recommend that there's a shareholders agreement in place.
An interesting question has come through on this topic, and I'm going to throw it to both Marni and Karen as the lawyers on the call. Although I know that neither of you are family law lawyers, but it's an important question. Can you talk about family law implications that can be addressed through a shareholders agreement? So even if you and your co-owners still get along, is there an intersection of family law with respect to the shareholder agreement? Karen, go for it.
Well, there is, because that's another very important point, and thank you for raising it. Much like Marni just said, in terms of who you're going to be in business with, if God forbid your partner in your business is going through a divorce, then their assets are going to have to be divided, and you don't want to have to share, to end up having their spouse put a financial burden on the company or on their ex-spouse to try to exit the company or pay them off. So we do have mechanisms in the agreement that deal with either the buying back or the valuation of the shares, or allow the other shareholders to pick up those shares quickly in order to deal with that very situation.
Well, and something that I'll comment on also is the concept of, and no one wants to do this, taking it outside of the shareholders agreement, but the domestic contract that can come into play too, that it's outside of the shareholders agreement, but if the concept is to, carve out the business, then something that we always talk to clients about, and it's a big thing in my practice, is, the domestic contract and what are the family law implications of, if you were involved in a business before or after marriage as a shareholder, or is it contributing to are the dividends being paid out contributing to your income? And so, carving it out, requires full and frank financial disclosure, and there's lots of things that go with it. But there is another mechanism too to carve it out as well from having to, fall into that ugliness. Is another place where we see family law.
Excellent. So taking it in a different direction, there's a number of interesting questions, but and please keep the questions coming through the chat. We definitely want to make sure that we have a chance to answer as many as we can. So this one, I like this one. It's a question that says, is it always true that you need to spend money to make money? I recently started a very small business with no capital, but a small government grant, and I find it extremely hard to spend any money. I assume what you're meaning there is that when you say you're finding it hard to spend the money is because you're nervous about putting that capital to use. So you said, but of course it's necessary. So do you have any tips or tricks to getting around the barrier of needing money or investment upfront? Anyone have any comments?
I think that I don't necessarily think it's true that you always have to spend money to make money, although my husband would tell you otherwise with respect to me. But I do think that, you have to prioritize. I would be nervous too. You have a grant, but you have to assess, what are your absolute needs and what are your aspirations. And and live within those means. I don't know how to get you over the hump, and I don't know exactly what you're looking to spend, but for example, at a certain point, if you need a bookkeeper, it's probably appropriate to assess getting a bookkeeper as opposed to spending your time doing bookkeeping, and that would potentially take you away from running your business. That's sort of the way I would consider the expenditures.
One thing that I think, if we take it back to what Laura was talking about at the beginning, is if you take the time to come up with a financial plan and map out the expenditures of the business and look at a period of time and say, okay, this is how much money I've got. I'm going to prioritize, like Karen mentioned, on these different items. And you take the time to put the effort into the financial plan. And if you don't necessarily have a bookkeeper or an accountant yet, but even to talk it through with a friend or someone and say, hey, this is how I think the money is going to be spent. Then, once you've made the commitment to yourself, if you will, that, okay, this is my plan, this is how I'm going to start doling out the money, that might help you get over that barrier. And one thing I wanted to mention too, is that it's important, it's important to spend the money wisely, if you will, but at the same time, recognize that often, if you don't set up the business if you don't spend the time and the money and the effort to set up the business from the outset in the correct way, you often spending much more money later on to fix it or to bring it back to how you wanted. So that's just I don't know if it's a trick or a tip. It's just my tales from experience. Okay, so I'm going to get back to another question that we have here. So, and this one is actually, Karen, I know you're doing a lot of the talking right now, but this one's going back to you as well. So the question is, or the comment is, I've inherited a team of advisors that my parents had. I want to build my own team of advisors for myself and for my business, including advisors such as a lawyer, an accountant, an investment advisor. What should I consider when looking to build my team?
That's an interesting one. I think you should talk to some of your peers and get recommendations. I think, like any relationship, it's about, trust and good chemistry and communication. With respect to lawyers, I think you want to know that this person is going to be available to you, that they're going to answer your questions and return your calls and be prompt. And I think that's the same as any other service provider, whether it's an accountant or a planner. It's also nice that your team can work well together. And so, it would be nice if you could meet several people that are working together in that way up front. And I think the key, though, is to meet with people and interview them. Hear what they have to say, what they have to offer, what kind of services their firm or their small practice can offer, what kind of support that they can give you. And I would meet, sort of 2 or 3 of each, and come up with, your top choices. Look at hourly rates, look at where they, what kind of other services do you want? A multidisciplinary law firm, one that can provide you with sort of tax, in financial services, corporate services, or do you want something a little bit lower key? And I think that's the key, is to sort of find, just like you would find anybody else, that whether it be a doctor for your child or whatever, that you feel comfortable, you feel like you can be open, and that you're not begging for them to return your phone call.
Laura or Melanie, before we go on, Melanie, looks like you got some comments there. Go for it.
Yeah, so I would discount the existing advisors that your family has, because they know the history. So that's one thing. And I'd also make sure that you're aligned with the similar values, because I think, you're going to be working with these advisors long-term, and you really have to have very similar values. I think it's super important, but don't discount the existing professionals that the family has had in the past as well.
And to Melanie's point, and one thing on the team front is, I think team is key. And one thing that I think people really need to think about when they're picking advisors is to pick someone who knows what they know and has the services that you need, but doesn't purport, this is just a personal point, that doesn't purport to be able to do everything. right? I think it's very important when you're looking for the right advisors to pick the advisors that suit the needs that you do. And, people who excel at one thing can't do it all. So, I was on the phone with someone the other day who kind of said, I didn't need, a generalist. I needed a surgeon, right? I didn't want to call someone who just does a bit of everything. I needed someone with precision who does what I need them to do. And so to me, like when I talk to clients, it's about staying in your lane and knowing what you know and reaching out to those, because I do think we're in a world where there doesn't have to be one trusted advisor. I think it can be a team. To Karen, your point, that works well together and that complements each other and doesn't compete with one another. And I think that is, a really good thing. The more heads at the table, the better you're going to be served. So that's one thing that, when clients are looking to build their team. The other thing, and I just want to say on Mel's point about, don't discount the old advisors, you can look to their succession plan too. Right? Because the senior advisors, the good ones, have recognized they need a succession plan. And it may be that you just need to, be introduced to the succession plan, and that may still be the right fit for you. So that's the other kind of point that I'd put out there.
Laura, I saw you go off mute and on mute. Maybe Marni covered what you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just gonna reiterate really what Marni was saying. I mean, I think that especially with some of the more experienced advisors, it is really important to see what their team, like internally, whether it's the law team or the accounting team, has to offer. Because if you are looking for an advisor that's going to work with you over the long term, you want to keep that in mind with your advisor team as well, and see what the next 5-10 years are really going to look like.
So I'm going to pop into a new question that came in actually in the Q&A that I'm actually going to throw it to all three of you, and anyone can kind of jump in. But it really speaks to words of wisdom to female entrepreneurs who, despite being quite accomplished, they still lack some confidence in their financial knowledge and abilities. And that's why we this is literally the crux of why we created this seminar, is to have a safe space and feel like they aren't taken seriously. What are some words of advice, wisdom?
So specific words to female entrepreneurs that have all the skills, lack the confidence.
I'll take it first. I think that it's important really to find those advisors that have the openness and the ability to really communicate with you. And I think it goes back to what Karen was just saying in the last question, especially in this environment where, by and large, most of us are working from home. There's a lot of distractions with just life in a different way than maybe we were used to in the past. I think it's important to find people that are aligned with you in terms of their communication style. And generally, increasing communication can really reduce that feeling of being alone, or that unsettled feeling when you have those insecurities, especially at first. I think it's important to find somebody that's willing to just talk to you and reaching out to really find that team for you. And I think that by speaking with somebody like that, or with a team like that, especially with like-minded people, just your confidence starts growing exponentially.
There are organizations out there that I've been involved with at various points in my career. One that comes to mind is COWI. I assume that they're still around, the Canadian Association of Women Executives and Entrepreneurs. And that's a place where it's not expensive to join. This is just speaking from past experience. It wasn't expensive. Their events were not expensive, but you could go and talk to other like-minded women specifically about these types of things. And the room, everyone was there. Maybe it was to go and taste a new wine, or to play golf, or whatever it was, or just to have dinner with other women. But it really was a place for women to support each other and to listen to each other and to build up their confidence. One of my secrets is that I will do the power pose. Is it Amy Cuddy? Is that the one? I will do the power posing to get my female confidence up, because sometimes the women don't have as much confidence as they otherwise could. So I think it's Amy Cuddy. Power posing, it increases your testosterone. And when you're going into those big discussions, sometimes my staff will see me power posing in my office, and I'm like, having a big call coming up. I got to get that, testosterone up and build my confidence. So yeah, I totally understand. I totally understand. Karen or Melanie, any comments?
Look, I think women are just a little more earnest, and but something I joined about maybe 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, is an organization called a WPO, Women's Presence Organization, and we meet on a monthly basis, and it's like an informal. You have like a little informal board of directors, and you come there every month, and you talk about your issues. Everyone's in a different service or different industry, and someone has issues with their husband or ex-husband, or staffing issues or children, whatever it may be. We're human beings, and I think it's a great way to get like-minded, successful women together, talking about just life and business and obstacles and success. And so I think that associating yourself with a women's organization might also allow you to gain more confidence and more friendships. And I think it's been an amazing experience for myself. So there's a plug for WPO if anyone has any questions, wants to reach out to me.
I'd like to be a part of that. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is. We could talk.
I agree with Laura and Mel. Like it's, it takes a long time to find your voice, whether it's doing what I do or what Melanie does or Laura or or Ali or Marni. And I think earnest is probably the right word. Some of us are a little bit louder than others. It took me a long time. I was quite quiet in the first, I'd say, 7 years of practice. I did a lot of taking in. And I think the key for me was to try to find people who I felt I could learn from, who I respected. I liked their style. I thought that they were clever and bright, and they had something to teach me. And because it didn't come naturally to me at all, how to engage with others, with clients. I could sit there and read my law books, and I could draft my documents, and I was a good worker, but I didn't find it very comfortable to have a meet and greet or a networking event. And I really just like to travel in a little pack. I liked always having a wingman or woman who could teach me, and I could sort of get the juices flowing, so to speak. And that was how, for me, I really was able to develop that confidence to be able to do this type of thing on my own, to go out and to build my own practice and lead my own files and have people, associates that I work with and who I train, and who feel that they learn from me. It was really to find mentors and coaches and champions in my practice. And that's what I think we all need.
Well, and it's about finding your voice, right? I think is what we're all saying, is it doesn't come, I don't know if it comes the same for men, but it doesn't just come out of the gate, right? It's time. I remember thinking, when is someone ever going to call me? Like, when is it going to be my referral, my file, right? And then you put in the time and you put in the energy and you surround yourself with people who want to see you thrive. And who you respect. And all of the sudden, like the hard work, the sweat equity, which, we haven't really talked about, but the sweat equity that goes into building whatever it is, I'm part of a firm, but I run my own practice within the firm, and you have to create that with the tools you're provided with. So, you can't care, it's terrible. You can't care, what other people necessarily think or what the men in the room are thinking. I never let that steer me. I never let that piece of it steer me. I was very lucky to work in a group that was dominated by heavy hitter females, who were strong and, moms and partners and all of like the amazing things that they were. So the role models were there. But, it takes time. I don't think it just comes naturally. You fake it till you make it in a lot of ways, but you build your confidence as you're doing it, and then it just happens.
I do think, though, that, at least in my experience, and I won't say this is the true for every man, but You know, if I can recall looking back on my male counterparts, they just sort of pretended from day one that they knew what was going on and that they were comfortable and confident, and they wanted to, they had the elbows out and they were in there. And so it can be very intimidating, and a lot of women are really, really dedicated, loyal workers, but are insecure about that, and takes time. So I do, whether it's, I didn't have a female, any female mentors growing up in my firm. They were men, and because it wasn't a very female dominated area of practice. And it was, so I had to find people who I really felt could teach me and come and give me that kind of support. Because there was no other woman partner who could do that with me.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take us back in a technical direction for a minute here. I'm going to throw this question over to Laura. So so the question is, and this is something that came in advance, and I've made it generic. So if I'm starting to think about selling my service business, how do I go about figuring how much my business is worth? Any ideas?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of figuring out value, the value of the business, I would highly encourage going and engaging with a chartered business evaluator. They are professionals that have the experience coming up with value, and I'd encourage you to look around and see for somebody who has experience in your industry. Because generally the value of a service business will be based on a multiple, an earnings multiple or a revenue multiple. And that multiple will vary based on industry. So really aligning yourself with a business evaluator that has experience in your industry will serve you well. And one of the things that you as the current business owner can really take a look at is what they call the quality of earnings. And I think that's a really important thing to consider before you really start speaking with a business evaluator, or as you're starting to speak to a business evaluator, because the quality of earnings can include things that you would know and they likely wouldn't by just looking at your financials, whether that's, you know, a new customer this year that you only had halfway through the year, and you really want to see the implications of that customer for a whole year. If you're going to look at a multiple of your earnings, look at any non-recurring expenses or, you know, expected expenses in the future in terms of the quality of earnings and how that will really impact the value, and consider, you know, you could consider a couple of years, and really an average of a couple of years if the current year doesn't necessarily reflect the value of your business.
And of course, Laura, we talk about speaking to business evaluators. I guess the one thing I would caution is don't expect that you could just call them up and say, hey, what's the multiple for my business? Everybody wants to know what's the multiplier? What is it? It's not quite how it, you know, you don't expect it to be a 5-minute conversation, but that's a great point. That's a great point.
And the one thing I'll also add is as soon as you start thinking about it, either call your accountant or your tax lawyer to see if there's any, and this is taking it a bit out of the service industry piece of it, but to see if there's any tax planning that can be done to kind of help on the sale from a structure perspective in terms of minimizing taxes on the sale. So, you know, it's always good as soon as you start thinking about it, because some planning can take, you know, 2 to 3, 2 years to be in place before you can reap the tax benefits. So as soon as you start thinking about selling, it's a good person, you know, the tax accountant or the tax lawyer to call.
Yeah, and I think that really, Marni, goes back to surrounding yourself with a team that's really working together for you and your business.
Also, I think the banks, if you're working with an advisor, an advisor can hook you up, introduce you to someone within the bank who can also evaluate the business to get, like, if you're just getting going too. So that's another service the banks could offer.
And if you have a relationship with the bank, then it may not cost you very much or anything to have that service done. So that's a very good point, Melanie.
Yeah. It wouldn't cost anything. It'd be part of the service.
Okay, I'm going to take the next question. I'm going to throw it back to you, Melanie. So now we're going to talk about what happens when we sell businesses. So the question specifically that came in was, my business is going to have a large liquidity event. Excellent. A large liquidity event coming up, and I'm going to be receiving a large amount of cash proceeds. I don't know how to build an investment portfolio. I've worked so hard in my life to grow and build my business, and the thought of losing money in a volatile market scares me. What do I do?
Okay, so I mean, it is a frightening, event. If you have no experience in the markets, it is frightening and overwhelming, and it's amazing that you've been successful. So I would start by looking for a strong financial advisor, interview several, and I think you have to start with getting a plan in place, starting up with a wealth plan, because you really want to understand really how much return you really need, and you need tax planning. So again, this is when all the advisors come together. But you start with the wealth plan, and then once the wealth plan has been created, I would consult with your accountant and lawyer as well to get their opinion, and then from there you'll see what sort of return you need, and then you could sort of slowly dip into the market. I mean, if you have accumulated a huge amount of wealth, really how much return do you really need? And you want to plan, what's more efficient tax wise, and so one could build a portfolio afterwards. That's sort of the easy part. And if you're just super nervous, I mean, you could make the whole portfolio, build it all in a guaranteed way. You won't have much return, especially if there's some inflation. Like I said, I mentioned that before, it's coming up. But you could start by building a small portion in the market. You have to have patience, and you have to find someone that you trust that will educate you along the way. But it's just like you've had success building your business, and it took time to build this successful business. It will take time to build a proper portfolio, and one has to be patient to sort of hold through the volatility of the markets for maybe a real investment cycle of at least 7 to 10 years. So that's what I would suggest. And I mean, there are different types of products like capital guaranteed products that we look at as well, where you're participating in the equity market, in the stock market, but your capital is guaranteed. So certain types of notes. But again, that's more the end game, finding the product. Creating the plan is, to me, the most important thing to do. Pardon?
Oh, I was going to say, when you say, referring to creating the plan, presumably there's a process there in terms of also, explaining your goals and objectives to your wealth planner to make sure that they can factor all of this in. So for example, if you're very risk averse, and as you mentioned, if you've got lots of money, then perhaps you don't need to take significant risk because you're going to be able to fund your lifestyle. But I think that's important, is making sure that communication piece and finding the right advisor who makes sure that plan matches what it is you're looking for. But sign me up for those guaranteed investments. I'm all for it.
There you go. So yeah, and again, when you're doing the plan, you're working with a bunch of professionals along the way. So you have a tax expert, you have your accountant, you have your lawyers, you're reviewing your wills, and yeah, you might be in need of a sort of a monthly income, so you create a dividend portfolio. But volatility in the market, I mean, I guess if one has no experience with it, it could be very frightening and it's hard to understand. But it's just like any other business. You have to kind of look at it like you're buying pieces of businesses when you're buying the stock. Anyways, it takes time. It takes a couple of years of experience and and patience to invest.
Marni, do you want to go ahead with our next question?
I absolutely do. So this is taking it, Karen. We're gonna circle back to you, and it's the concept of retirement, and it's the concept of retirement for someone who has put their blood, sweat, and tears into a business and has grown and they've worked their whole life at it, and they're scared and they just don't know what to do. It's funny to ask the question to a lawyer because I find lawyers never retire. But with that said, I'm sure you have plenty of clients who are facing that situation and who come to you, and what are some words of wisdom that you give them?
Well, the words of wisdom that I can give come from my own parents. And they're each had such different approaches to their own retirement. And I've sort of, I feel very, I feel like it's really, they've both done it really quite beautifully. The one thing is that, you know, I've sort of learned over the years is that we need hobbies. Um, we definitely need to cultivate hobbies when we're younger, because, you know, these and interests and friend groups and community organizations and volunteer organizations, because it's not like you just turn off a switch and then you turn on another one and it's all there for you. Much like a young, you know, student in university has to plan and plod and plan and plot through to build a life and a career. I think we have to take a similar approach to the dialing down of a career into retirement. And so with my father, you know, he sold his practice after many years of being a successful veterinarian. And he was one of those guys who had a million hobbies, wanted to write a book, wanted to act in plays, wanted to, you know, work on his train set. And so for him, there was no fear at all. My mother was, you know, a vice president and administrator of a hospital. And the thought of her, you know, of her being retired was terrifying. And so she literally planned her retirement 3 or 4 years in advance. And I don't mean the financial part. I mean, what am I going to do when I retire? And I think it was perfect for her because there was no sense of loss or emptiness. She found her, you know, her rhythm and, you know, yes, sure, she loves to golf and she does that every single day in the summer, but she also has, you know, volunteer organizations. She's on several boards of directors. She went to do something she's always wanted to do, which is to become you know, a life coach. And so she can do that. She serves as an expert witness for a number of different law firms because she's you know, a nurse practitioner, you know, and so she fills her life. And that is, I think, the key. And for me, that's what I would want. That's what I sort of plan for my next stage of my life. It's to do more volunteer work, you know, to be on more not-for-profit boards, to feel like I'm contributing, but have the, you know, but in not the same way that I am now. And that's what I would do. That's what I would advise.
It's funny how you talked about your mom planning this out, you know, a few years in advance. I personally took, it was called a Get On Board course, teaching you how to be a board member. And I took the course a few years ago, and some might say it was 30 years before I'm going to retire. But I remember thinking like, oh, this is, you know, it's very important because, you know, it's funny in this pandemic where we're at home and I have more time on my hands. And I think like, geez, what am I going to do in, you know, whatever year it is that I'm going to retire and fill my time. So, you know, it's important to be planful, and it may even be a little bit scary, not just on the eve of retirement, but, you know, through all of our busy lives.
So just while we have, you know, a few minutes left and, you know, it's a bunch of successful entrepreneurial to varying degrees women on this panel, you know, are there any to those women in business just starting out, just doing what it is and, you know, just trying to pound the pavement and get ahead and make it work in this world, in this crazy world we're living in? I know, you know, I love actually that we've done some words of wisdom on this because I think it's so important. And I think us supporting each other is so important. But, you know, for those just starting out, like take it to the flip side. For those just starting out and, you know, they've got their business plan, they've got their projections, they've got the loan, like what are some good pieces of advice or that you've seen or that you've talked to your clients about in terms of kind of pushing them forward and helping them? You know, one thing I'll just throw out, you know, I was talking to a client the other day and, you know, they worked hard, they pounded the pavement and it was a bit, you know, not overnight success, but all of a sudden the success came. And they had just kind of blindly been like, you know, they had some advisors, all was fine. And they kind of woke up one day and recognized we've outgrown the advisors, right? Like we just didn't pay attention, right? And so luckily, you know, they had a couple of advisors that they trusted that were able to kind of steer them in the right direction to, you know, what was more appropriate for their current situation, right? But they just kind of went with the flow, and they woke up and realized, and, you know, they didn't take a huge active role in it while they were pounding the pavement, right? They just kind of, money was rolling in, all was well. What's some words of advice, if you have any? From the female perspective, take off your investment advisor hat, your accountant hat, your lawyer hat, just, you know, your female hat.
Well, you know, manage it properly. Like be organized, and keep your, you know, don't show up at the bank with like a, you know, a shopping bag of papers. Like be professional. You know what your documents mean and what they are. Read them. If you don't understand them, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's tons of people around, I know, in everybody's circles that are, you know, thrilled to be asked for advice. There's nothing actually better than for somebody to pick up the phone and ask you, you know, like, what do you think? It's very, we like to share what we know. And that's what I would say, like, you know, is to, you know, sort of sit up straight and show that you are, this is yours, and you care a great deal about it, and it's clean, and it's easy to follow, and your papers are in order. And I think that's a good start.
And I think along those lines, I mean, it's a good idea to every so often just take a few minutes and evaluate where you are. And that could be, you know, evaluate your group of advisors, evaluate if having a bookkeeper would make your life easier, if it's worthwhile for your business in terms of how you present yourself, and give yourself, you know, the ability to take that time. And even if the answer is, I'm good, I want to just continue status quo, then at least you've taken the time and made that decision at that point, instead of, you know, realizing when it's a little bit too late.
Yeah. Awesome. Marni, do you want to take us home?
I do. So I want to thank you all so much. Melanie, Karen, Laura, this was amazing. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We're incredibly grateful for your technical advice and the words of wisdom that you've been able to share.
And thank you, of course, also to all of those of you who've joined us tonight, and for your insightful questions. All of these questions really came from you, and we appreciate them. This specific webinar is the last in our series that Marni and I are chairing, but there will definitely be more financial literacy events in 2021. Keep checking your inboxes and see what topics the new chairs come up with. If there's any questions about tonight's content, please email Rachel Wolfson at rwolfson@ujafed.org, and she'll make sure that they get directed to the right people. Oh, sorry, this brings us to the end of our program. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the week. Goodbye, everybody.